June 15, 1945, Leyte Island, Philippines. In the sweltering heat of a Pacific battlefield, young Japanese nurses like Aki had been taught to expect only death or worse from their American enemies, barbaric invaders who would show no mercy to the wounded. But as the smoke cleared from the latest clash, something unexpected unfolded in a makeshift aid station, where the line between foe and fellow human blurred in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a simple act of surrender revealed a world far removed from the propaganda that had shaped her life, pulling her into a quiet storm of doubt and discovery. Aki had always believed she was prepared for whatever the war demanded. Born in a quiet coastal town near Tokyo in 1922, she grew up in the shadow of the emperor's divine rule, where school lessons and radio broadcasts painted a picture of unyielding honor and sacrifice. By her late teens, as the empire's reach stretched across the islands, Aki joined the Imperial Navy's Nursing Corps, one of thousands of young women trained to tend to soldiers under the strict code of Bushido, the way of the warrior that demanded loyalty above all else, even in the face of capture or death. Her training was rigorous, starting at a naval academy in 1940, where instructors drilled into her the idea that surrender was the ultimate shame, a betrayal of the soul. "The American devils are weak in spirit, but savage in action," her superiors would say, recounting tales of Pearl Harbor revenge and island battles where U.S. forces supposedly tortured prisoners without remorse. Aki memorized the procedures: how to bandage shrapnel wounds with scarce cloth, administer morphine from dwindling supplies, and, if overwhelmed, prepare for honorable ends, perhaps a hidden vial of poison or a final defiant stand. In simple terms, Bushido meant putting the group's needs before your own, no matter the cost. And for nurses like her, it extended to caring for the injured until the very last breath. By 1944, as Japan's fortunes waned in the Pacific, Aki was deployed to forward bases, witnessing the toll of endless dogfights and amphibious assaults. Over 200,000 Japanese women served in auxiliary roles during the war. Propaganda nightmares. Shells rained down like a furious storm as the American ships closed in, their massive silhouettes cutting through the mist off Leyte's shores. Aki huddled in a shallow trench with her medical team, the ground shaking under the barrage that turned the once green island into a hell of mud and fire. The Battle of Leyte had erupted months earlier, in October 1944, a desperate push by Japanese forces to halt the U.S. island-hopping campaign that was steadily reclaiming the Pacific. American forces, with over 200,000 troops and a fleet boasting more aircraft carriers than Japan could match, overwhelmed the defenders in a clash that lasted weeks and claimed over 100,000 lives on both sides. For medical units like Aki's, positioned near the front lines to evacuate the wounded, the fight was a blur of screams and stretchers, where every explosion reminded them of the Empire's fading grip. As the sun dipped low, Aki bandaged a young sailor's leg, his face pale from blood loss, whispering words of encouragement drawn from her training. "Hold on for the Emperor. Your sacrifice honors us all." But the air grew thick with the roar of approaching landing craft, and soon U.S. Marines stormed the beach, their rifles cracking in precise bursts. Japanese soldiers fell back, some charging in futile banzai attacks, others slipping into the jungle. Over 5,000 were captured in those chaotic days, many medics among them who refused to leave their patients until the end. Aki's heart pounded with the terror drilled into her since childhood. These were the demons of the stories, men who bayoneted the helpless and reveled in cruelty, as the radio had warned. She pictured their faces twisted in rage, ready to drag her away for unspeakable fates, her mind racing with the Bushido vow to die rather than submit. Clutching her kit, she dragged a wounded comrade toward cover, but a grenade's blast sent them sprawling, shrapnel grazing her arm in a hot sting that made her gasp. In that moment of pain and smoke, the world narrowed to survival. All the ideals of honor felt distant against the raw fear of what the victors might do. Wounded and alone amid the debris, she raised her hands in surrender, her voice barely a whisper.
The area for threats. This was the reality of U.S. policy in the Pacific by mid-1945, guided by the Geneva Conventions that demanded humane treatment for all prisoners, even from an enemy known for its own harsh codes. American forces had captured tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers across the islands, with camps in places like the Philippines holding over 40,000 by war's end. And medics were under strict orders to prioritize the wounded, enemy or not, to prevent disease from spreading and to uphold the rules of war. In Leyte alone, after the fierce battles, U.S. teams set up forward aid stations where captured personnel received immediate care, saving lives that might have been lost to infection or neglect. Aki's mind reeled as they helped her to her feet, one medic gently examining the gash on her arm without a word of accusation. His hands were clean, gloved in something white and crisp, applying a powder that stung but promised healing far beyond the herbal pastes she knew. She had braced for torture, for the savage end the stories promised, images of bound prisoners thrown into the sea or worse. But here was efficiency, a quiet professionalism that treated her not as a demon's handmaiden, but as another injured soul in the mess of battle. Confusion washed over her like the island's humid breeze. Was this a trick? Or had the propaganda lied about the heart of the foe? In her later reflections, shared in a post-war diary, she described that moment as the first crack in the wall of her beliefs, where fear gave way to a wary wonder at this unexpected decency. Yet as they bandaged her wound and offered a sip of water from a canteen that tasted clean and cool, the questions only deepened. They led her to a tent that smelled of something unfamiliar, sharp and medicinal, where the real surprises of captivity began to unfold. Inside, the air was filled with the hum of generators, a steady drone that powered lights and machines Aki had only heard about in whispers, turning the dim tent into a place of unnatural brightness and order. She was guided to a low cot amid rows of similar beds, where other wounded Japanese soldiers lay under clean white sheets, something her units had run out of months ago, forcing them. Aki had seen. In POW aid stations like this one on Leyte, captured medics and patients received the same treatments as U.S. troops, sulfa sprinkled directly into wounds to kill bacteria, followed by penicillin injections that were just becoming standard, saving thousands of lives where neglect would have claimed them. Simple as it sounded, this abundance stemmed from America's vast industrial might, shipping everything from morphine ampules to sterile gauze across oceans, while Japanese forces rationed even basic iodine. Aki watched as the doctor dusted the powder over her cut, the cool sensation easing the burn in a way that felt almost magical. Back on her side, wounds like this often festered without such wonders, leading to fevers that stole men away in days. Her mind spun with the contrast. This was the enemy who was supposed to revel in suffering. Yet here they worked methodically, wrapping her arm in fresh gauze that didn't tear or yellow like her own supplies. Doubt crept in stronger now. If they had all this, why fight so hard? Why show it to her, a foe, without grudge? It chipped at the stories of savage Americans, revealing instead a quiet strength born of preparation, not just fury. She lay there, the tense fans whirring softly overhead, as the implications settled like the powder on her skin. Care that healed, not just prolonged the fight. A simple gesture made it all feel real, pulling her deeper into this bewildering new world.
When the medic offered her a piece of chocolate from his pocket, wrapped in shiny foil that caught the tense light, Aki froze, her fingers hovering as if the treat were a trick or a poison. Days blurred into a routine in the POW camp on Leyte, where captured Japanese like her were grouped in open-air compounds surrounded by wire, but with tents for the injured and guards who patrolled more like watchful shepherds than jailers. Meals came 3 times a day on metal trays, steaming rice mixed with canned meat, fresh fruit from the island's groves, and sometimes a hot cup of coffee that filled the air with a rich, unfamiliar aroma, a luxury her family back home could only dream of amid ration cards and black markets. Aki moved gingerly where even sugar was a rarity. For women like Aki, separated into women's quarters for privacy, this meant clean uniforms laundered daily and feminine supplies that spoke of thoughtfulness, not just efficiency. But the real jolt came in the touches, the way a male medic might steady her elbow during a dizzy spell, and she'd flinch back, her breath catching at the shadow of old fears from propaganda tales of barbaric hands. That chocolate, melting sweetly on her tongue when she finally accepted it, symbolized more than indulgence. It was a crack in the armor of her world, where enemies were monsters driven by greed, not men sharing a bar from home to ease a stranger's hunger. Aki chewed slowly, the richness overwhelming after years of bland gruel. And for the first time, a quiet question formed. If they could afford this endless flow of kindness and goods, what did it say about the war her side had waged so fiercely? Her Bushido pride twisted into confusion, the sweetness lingering like an unwelcome truth. Nights brought whispers among the nurses of what might come next, as the camp's lights flickered on with a reliability she had never known. In the dim light of the camp's lanterns, doubts began to creep in, flickering like shadows across Aki's thoughts as she lay awake, the day's kindnesses replaying in her mind. Nights in the compound were a time for hushed talks among the captured nurses, huddled under thin blankets against the tropical chill, sharing scraps of memory from home while avoiding the guards' distant patrols. Aki stared at the wire fence silhouetted against the stars. Her Bushido training, a code drilled into every Japanese child, emphasizing loyalty, honor, and death before dishonor, now feeling like a heavy chain around her heart. Surrender, they had been taught, was the coward's path, stripping a warrior of all dignity. For women in service, it meant even greater shame, a failure to embody the selfless spirit of the empire that demanded endurance until the end. By mid-1945, as rumors of distant atomic blasts and Soviet advances filtered into the camps, the stigma of capture hung over every prisoner like a curse, with many facing silent judgment from their own ranks for choosing life over ritual suicide. Scarcity, yet here, in captivity, she felt a strange relief amid the growing questions. Was the code she lived by a shield or a blindfold, keeping her from seeing the humanity in those she was taught to fear? The internal storm raged quietly, pride clashing with the evidence of her senses, the chocolate's sweetness now tasting like a betrayal of old truths. One patient's story, whispered in the morning rounds, pushed her further into that unraveling maze of belief. Helping another nurse with her feverish patient, Aki heard the impossible, a tale that shattered the last remnants of the monster myths she'd clung to. The morning sun filtered through the tent flaps as Aki knelt beside Yumi, a fellow corps member from a neighboring unit, whose hands shook while applying a cool cloth to a soldier's brow. The camp's medical area buzzed with quiet activity, Japanese prisoners aiding under supervision, where U.S. orderlies demonstrated techniques like tying tourniquets or mixing saline solutions, their patients turning the space into an unlikely classroom. Aki passed a fresh compress, noting how Yumi's eyes darted to the guards, still half expecting a blow or worse, as the propaganda had warned of American lust for revenge against women who served the empire. Yet as they worked, Yumi leaned close, her voice a murmur. "Last night, one of them, the sergeant, sat with my brother, talked about baseball back home, even laughed when he misunderstood the words." This wasn't the savage horde from the broadcasts. The U.S. Army Nurse Corps, with over 50,000 women trained in joint operations by 1945, embodied a discipline that extended to all, fostering low rates of misconduct in POW handling, documented in reports showing fewer than 1% of incidents involving abuse, thanks to strict codes and swift courts-martial for violations. For captives like these nurses, separated and protected in women's wards, this meant encounters marked by courtesy, male medics keeping distance unless needed, offering explanations in simple phrases, and prioritizing healing over humiliation, a far cry from the isolation and fear Japanese women had endured in their own ranks. Aki paused, the story sinking in like the saline they used, clear and restore wounds, as the camp medic carefully unwound the dressing from Aki's arm, exposing skin that had begun to heal without the angry red streaks of infection she'd feared. It was a standard procedure in the mornings, when lines formed outside the hygiene tents, where POWs received fresh linens and instructions on keeping clean. Simple acts that prevented outbreaks in the humid climate. The U.S. forces, drawing from lessons of earlier campaigns like Guadalcanal, emphasized sanitation with a fervor that cut infection rates by up to 80% in camps, supplying crates of soap bars and basins of hot water trucked in from supply ships that docked weekly. For Aki, who had scrubbed with seawater and ash during island postings, this was another layer of the abundance. Crisp white sheets changed daily, preventing the bedsores that plagued understaffed Japanese wards. And a bar of soap handed over like it was nothing, its scent floral and clean, evoking childhood baths long forgotten. She held the soap in her palm as the medic nodded for her to use it, the weight of it light yet profound, a symbol of civility that mocked the deprivations her people endured, where civilians rationed even water for washing amid bombed factories. Aki lathered slowly under a trickle from a bucket, the suds rinsing away not just dirt, but the invisible stains of fear, her hands no longer trembling at the thought of unclean touches or worse fates for women like her. Shame welled up, not for surrender, but for the empire's hollow promises of purity through hardship. If her side had fought so valiantly, why had they left their own to suffer in scarcity, while this enemy bathed their prisoners in comfort? The clean linen draped over her shoulders afterward felt like a quiet dignity, easing the psychological burdens that had kept her isolated, as if the water had washed away the shadows of propaganda's lies. In her mind, the act mirrored a deeper cleansing, where old terrors of violation dissolved into tentative peace, replaced by a reluctant gratitude for this ordered world. As weeks turned to months, the world outside the camp shifted, bringing news that would test her newfound clarity in ways she never expected. One stormy night, everything broke open, as thunder rolled over the camp and rain hammered the tents like a final assault from the Midwest, who'd seen too many islands fall, entered to secure the supplies, his rain-slicked helmet under one arm, nodding to her with the same steady respect that had become routine. Lightning cracked the sky, and in that flash, Aki's pent-up storm burst. She stood, words tumbling out in broken English mixed with gestures, confronting him about the fears that had haunted her, the propaganda's tales of American savagery, the Bushido code that branded capture as eternal shame, and the dread of what hands like his might do to women like her in defeat. He listened without interruption, then shared simply. His letters from home, the brother lost at sea, the oath to heal any who needed it, enemy or not, because the fight was against the war, not the souls caught in it. In simple terms, America's edge lay in its factories and farms that churned out not just weapons, but waves of aid, ships loaded with food, medicine, and even vocational classes for POWs heading home, ensuring over 90% of captured personnel, including medics and nurses, survived to rebuild, a mercy that exposed Japan's isolation and the hollowness of its unyielding pride. The realization hit Aki like the thunder, tears streaming down her face unnoticed in the rain leaking through the canvas. The myths of demonic foes dissolved into the truth of shared humanity. Her ideologies crash, leaving a hollow ache. The war wasn't lost on bloodied shores, but in the minds and machines that sustained life beyond victory, where abundance and decency outlasted rage. She sank to the cot, clutching a spare blanket as if it anchored her to this fragile new ground, the storm's roar fading to a whisper of what might come next. Repatriation Day dawned with mixed feelings, carrying Aki toward a homeland forever altered by the truths she'd glimpsed. Repatriation Day dawned with mixed feelings, the camp's wire fences seeming taller under a clear Philippine sky as Aki packed her few belongings into a canvas bag. The process unfolded methodically in those final weeks of 1945, with U.S. Navy transports lining the ports to carry the last waves of prisoners home, a humanitarian effort that repatriated over 100,000 Japanese by year's end, including thousands of medics, shown her a world where dignity wasn't rationed like rice. Aki's heart tugged in two directions as she joined the line, the bag's strap digging into her shoulder like a reminder of the old life. Bittersweet enlightenment settled over her like the morning mist. The mercy shown by her captors had mended more than her arm, fostering a subtle transformation where Bushido's rigid honor now felt brittle against the strength of quiet compassion. She glanced at Yumi walking beside her, both sharing nods that spoke of shared rebirth, no longer isolated in terror, but connected by the truths they'd uncovered amid the tents and supplies. The war's end brought relief, yes, but also a profound clarity. Survival wasn't shame, but a chance to rebuild, with eyes wide open to the human threads that bound even foes. Looking back, she understood the true cost, not in the thunder of guns, but in the slow bloom of doubt that revealed victories won far from the front lines. The war ended, but the lessons lingered, weaving into the fabric of Aki's everyday life and the stories she passed to a new generation. In the quiet years that followed, as Japan rebuilt under the American occupation's watchful eye, Aki found her voice in subtle ways, teaching nursing classes at a community center in the 1950s, where she incorporated lessons from her captivity, like the importance of equitable care for all patients, drawing from the integrated wards on Leyte. Her home became a haven of simple abundances, shelves stocked with imported goods from U.S. aid packages, a radio tuned to international broadcasts that reminded her of the camp's announcements, and letters exchanged with a former U.S. medic, a pen-pal connection that bridged the gap for a few like her who sought closure amid the era's reconciliation efforts. By the 1960s, as economic miracles unfolded, Aki's internal world had steadied into a tapestry of insight, where the emotional core of her journey, disorientation turning to measured understanding, mirrored the broader healing of a nation grappling with its past. Post-war testimonies from women like her, collected in oral histories and memoirs archived in places like Tokyo's National Diet Library, rippled outward. In the end, Aki's wounds healed not just from medicine, but from shattered illusions that paved the way for a more grounded peace. If stories like hers move you, consider subscribing for more glimpses into history's hidden heart.